Welcome to another video class at the redoxdoc.com. I'm Dr. Ward, and this class is about addiction and the biology behind it that pertains to redox signaling. So I thought I'd just start with a general comment about addiction. I have worked in the area of addiction medicine since 2004 and have done research in my clinic as well as treated lots of patients with medication-assisted treatment as well as counseling. It's a special topic to me, and so I just thought I'd share some ideas and also teach you a little bit about how redox chemistry applies to the recovery process. So what is addiction? Well, it's probably easier to tell you what it's not to begin. For example, a lot of people are confused that addiction is somehow related to dependency. It only is in part. So for example, a person would be using insulin to treat their diabetes, and they are depending on the insulin for it to work and to help their health. If they stop using that drug, they get sick. They are dependent on the insulin, but they're not having a problem with addiction. That's very different. So addiction is the reckless and dangerous use of a drug that is altering the body and the mind and causing problems to show up in your life. So that is addiction, and it can be any number of things, including food addiction, gambling addiction, etc. They have the same chemical effects on our brain that science has shown. So the other thing that needs to be discussed is the prevalence of addiction. 1 in 10 Americans, adults, has a problem with addiction. So as you're driving down the highway, 1 in 10 cars that pass you has a person driving that car who has an addiction problem. It's a sobering thought. So science in the last 10 years or so has been very helpful in helping us understand the chemistry of our brain. We have a new research tool called functional MRI. It actually shows pictures of the brain while we are thinking, which parts of our brain are working and how well. So you can actually look into the brain without having to do biopsies. It's very helpful. In years past, we couldn't do that. We had to do autopsies to figure out what was wrong with people's brains. Today, we can see that, how it's working. So let's talk a little bit about the biochemistry of addiction. And I know this is a very busy drawing. I'm going to try and simplify it for you. The main hub of what drives addiction has to do with a certain part of our brain, deep in our brain, sort of toward the front of the brain, called the nucleus accumbens. And it's under the influence of the frontal lobe areas of our brain, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex. These parts of the brain are the parts that influence our actions based on learning. So for example, if we did something that was pleasurable, we enjoyed driving a car, and we drive this car, and man, we just feel exhilarated because it's a great little Corvette or something. We learn from that experience because we experience joy in our nucleus accumbens. And the learning process that occurred in our prefrontal cortex is imprinted in our memory. Then later, we can think about driving our Corvette and have the same experience. We don't have to go do it. We know it. We know what it's like because we remember. That's the beauty of having a large brain, us human beings, compared to other animals. So life and learning helps us understand this, and the influence of that thought on the nucleus accumbens never really goes away. It doesn't extinguish, or we don't become tolerant to the influence of the chemical reactions that are redox molecule mediated. Okay, step back. Now, there are other experiences that are influenced by endorphins or drugs. And the natural process of endorphins can also stimulate the nucleus accumbens, like exercise, for example, produces lots of endorphins, and we feel an experience of joy and exhilaration. This is mediated by a little different chemical reaction revolving around dopamine, and it's also redox driven because the influence of this chemical on the nucleus accumbens requires redox molecules to circulate those chemical bonds. So this reaction has sort of breaks involved. And Oftentimes, when we secrete endorphins, we turn off the braking mechanisms, which is called GABA, that mediates through the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, and also influences the nucleus accumbens, kind of a back door. And this is okay. It normally works because we have brakes. But what happens sometimes is an opiate-like drug, which can also affect the nucleus accumbens through dopamine, turns off the brakes of GABA and doesn't modulate the VTA, and all of a sudden we're getting too much stimulation here, and the nucleus accumbens forgets about what's going on in our learning process in the frontal cortex, and this is all that matters because it's so enjoyable. And the problem with this is that because this is mediated through a mechanism that's not natural, we lose brakes. We have to secrete more and more and more dopamine to get the same effect because of something called tolerance that develops. So people start doing this reckless drug thing more and more and more to get the same effect. They don't seem to have any motivation without it, and they've forgotten all of the events in our life that brought us joy before. All the learning goes away. It becomes unimportant or forgotten. And if you look at the behavior of people, they lose interest in relationships. The only thing that matters in their life is the drug, and they'll do whatever it takes to be able to maintain their ever increasingly deepening addiction. And so to break this cycle, you have to remove the drug. You can't use a little bit and get by. It doesn't work that way. So as you take away the drug, all of a sudden the nucleus accumbens is without dopamine and it's not functioning well. And so people need a great deal of support in recovery. So let's talk about how we can help and talk about it in terms of redox chemistry. Well, so to repair the neuronal connections or the nerve connections, we've got to think about the brain cells themselves that are actually been beat up and made full of toxins as a result of pouring all these chemicals into the body and the brain. So nerve cells are very specialized in what they do. For example, here's a picture of a nerve cell sending a signal down into a synapse to connect with another nerve cell, and the message needs to continue on. So to connect from one cell to the next cell, there's something called a synapse. And these nerves have to secrete neurotransmitters in order for the communication to occur. This is highly specialized. And in order to manufacture those, they have to be healthy. They have to also reuptake these neurotransmitters and recycle them. That requires a lot of biochemistry that's redox driven, by the way. And when they're not able to do this, the connections don't work or they're very slow. Sometimes the real issue is the balance of those chemicals, not so much whether or not they're there. And so we know that serotonin and GABA in the brain are calming and balancing neurotransmitters that allow us to sleep and be at peace and to focus. Other neurotransmitters, dopamine and norepinephrine, epinephrine, glutamate, these are excitatory neurotransmitters that motivate us, that help us have some mojo to get things done. These things get all out of whack in the presence of addiction, and that balance can repair. The brain knows what to do. The body can do this. It takes time and it takes resources. And so in order for that to occur, you got to be able to sleep. It's during sleep that our body does its repair work. In the day, we're busy, but our body and our brain gets busy at night. In order to restore these balances, sleep is critical. We have to travel through the right kinds of sleep cycles. We need to secrete certain hormones to help us sleep, like melatonin from the pineal gland, antidiuretic hormone also from the pineal gland. And if we can restore that, then we can begin this healing process and repair neuronal connections. So one of the key steps in making that happen is to get our nutrition back in line. And there are certainly foods that provide resources for this. We need, in this case, animal-based foods to provide certain amino acids that are critical for our brain function. We also need the B vitamin foods that come from vegetables and fruits. And so both are critical, not just one or the other. Nutritional supplements make a huge difference here as well. Another big deal is to restore the brakes. So GABA's got to come back in line in order for this whole thing to start working again. The absence of brakes is called hypofrontal syndrome. If you can imagine, in the midst of addiction, to kind of have your foot on the gas, but never to be able to put on the brakes with emotions and thoughts that you're having. You just don't have the ability to shut it down. All you got is go. And people feel quite afraid. They're afraid to think certain thoughts. They're afraid to do certain things because they have no brakes. And so the hypofrontal syndrome will dissipate as the body restores GABA and as you take away the drugs. And that happens best when we simply live life. We start to live life and live in the present and not the past, and we start to see that gradually we can get through certain experiences and use our brakes where we're afraid we don't have them, and so people avoid doing things. They avoid living life, living in the present, getting outside, doing stuff. And then the last piece is hope. Believe it or not, hope is a real thing. It is not just faith. It's faith based on a real plan. And when people are provided a real plan of action, they will take step-by-step execution of the plan. And as they see little changes, they restore hope. So group counseling, medical treatment, medical-assisted treatment, and replenishing the redox molecules that are, as you see, all of these chemical reactions are happening. It's at the core of our biology. And so I have witnessed when people replenish redox molecules with a supplement that has balanced resources of both positive and negatively charged redox molecules, they actually start to see an improvement in their sleep. That's one of the initial things. It helps to restore neurotransmitter balance. It are key components in astrocyte healing. The molecules of healing are redox molecules. And it just allows for this process to unfold in a healthy and gradual way. There's no medicine that just cures addiction. It's a process. And so, as you can see, it's a little bit of a complex process, but done properly with some medical guidance and with healthy endeavors that you can be in charge of, like nutritional components and redox molecule supplementation, will make a huge difference. I hope this has been helpful. I've enjoyed being with you. We'll see you at the next class.